Hello, all, and welcome to my review of The Church on Ruby Road. So, full disclosure, I've watched this episode twice today. I watched it once with the fam, and then I watched it once by myself once I got back home after my Christmas celebrations. But I'm going to be talking about this. There's a lot to go into here. This is the first episode, I believe, of Season 1 of Doctor Who. The new Season 1 of New Who. And I'm going to be getting into full spoilers for this because I just have to talk about everything. Okay, so to start out with, I already know from online discourse that there is speculation about something in this episode. I have my own theory and I have some justification for that, but I will get to that at the end. You'll have to stay tuned. Ooh. Okay, all right, so starting off. This is the first full episode with Shudigatwa as the 15th Doctor. We thought he was 14, now we know he's 15, and Ruby Sunday. And it's interesting because the church on Ruby Road, as soon as I found out the thing about the baby, I was like, oh, they probably named the baby after Ruby Road, and then Sunday, they don't know who she came from, so like Sunday is being the day of the week, or I shouldn't say they don't know who she came from. They don't know who her mother or father were. So Ruby Sunday, interesting. And I gotta say, right at the beginning of this Doctor Who episode, the visuals and the colors are looking really nice. One of the things I really liked about the Chibnall era, and I gotta be honest, there weren't too many of those, but one of the things I liked was the visuals and the saturation of the colors and how good it looked. I don't really like this new desaturated look that things have where it's like super gritty and gray. I miss very colorful television, especially with older televisions. The tube TVs used to render things very colorfully. And this color palette here, when the Doctor's going out to, walk by that church on Ruby Road, I'm like, this is perfect. This is exactly the kind of colors that you see on Christmas, sort of in the low light, and I just really like the way that looked. The choir there with the kids singing, or I don't know if it was kids, it was a choir singing the Carol of the Bells. And I'm like, this is really cool. This is really atmospheric. And you got the snow coming down. So I just right at the beginning, the cinematography, the presentation of that, I really liked it. The cliffhanger at the beginning, like the cold open, you could call it, but it's not really a cold open, but I thought that was a weird place to put the title sequence. It's just like, and then the Doctor came. And then it's like, I think maybe there should have been something like, maybe you see like one of the goblins there or something, which I know the goblins weren't there, but usually this is the same kind of thing I thought with the giggle, which is like, there wasn't really sufficiently something like, whoa, that's weird, or, that's interesting, or, I wonder where they're going with that. Like, there wasn't really anything sufficiently in that direction to justify kind of the crashing in of the title sequence. So that was just a small little criticism I had at the beginning. But, then we get into the title sequence, and we get to this thing with Ruby Sunday talking about where her parents came from. And I gotta say the acting, or where her parents came from, sorry, where she originated from as far as her parents and stuff in her adoption story. I really gotta stop saying that. I gotta get that right. Anyway, the acting there was a little bit choppy, I thought. Granted, it's probably really hard for Millie Gibson because she's having to pretend she's on a talk show. She's not looking at anyone who's on camera, and the shot stays on her for a really long time, and she has to sound very genuine, very sort of off the cuff, like not trying to deliver things like you would normally in a TV show because she's on a talk show on the show. So like that's a very hard thing to pull off, but I think that's kind of where directing comes in, and maybe they should have shot that a little bit differently. That's one of the things I'm going to be saying, by the way, is talking about direction in this episode, because that's going to become really relevant later. But anyway, we get this little thing that's a setup about, her parents and stuff, and it's kind of interesting. It kind of intrigues us to this character in the very beginning, because going into this, even like looking at promotional stuff, I didn't know anything about Ruby Sunday, and that like immediately made me much more interested in her character. So we start getting this weird thing with the goblins and their little hands kind of cropping up and making all these weird things happen, which is like, when you watch that, you're like, what does that mean? What's that signifying right there when there's like all these weird accidents that are happening because of the goblins. So that's kind of an intriguing thing. And then you get this thing with her family, and I think the moment where we really start getting into Ruby Sunday's family, that's the moment where I think it gets really interesting, because these characters are kind of drawing you in. One thing that Russell T is pretty good at is making you care about family dynamics. I know some people had some issue with Moffat and Clara Oswald and the way they did her sort of domestic life versus the doctor's life. I personally like that a lot. People were calling it the Clara show. I thought Clara was really good in her domestic situation and in her situation with the doctor. I like the balance between those two things. But regardless, people seem to like what Russell T did better, and I don't think this will be any exception to that. Ruby being adopted, and then her also living in that house with her grandmother. The dynamic between Ruby and her mom, you just believe it, right? And her mom being the foster mother who adopted her. It's something that you don't see a whole lot in shows that are not about that. It's. I'm not saying that they get it wrong or something. It's just that usually when you see something like that so heavily emphasized, it's because the show or the movie or something has specifically something to do with being adopted. In this case, they're just regular characters that happen to have fostering as part of their family dynamic, and I really like that. I don't think it's something that's like very heavy-handed where it's so like emphasized that it takes away from the rest of the story, because like I said, I like that domestic stuff in the show, but I think just establishing a solid foundation for the family of the companion at the beginning is a good thing. So I really like that family dynamic there. I like the thing with the baby girl and how excited they are about, being able to adopt a newborn. I like that there's lines in there like, it's been so long since we've been able to foster a kid that's this young. Like, just having those lines in there that make it seem much more like this is a real thing that they're doing, not just like a gimmick of the show, like I said. So that's really good. You get this thing between there that I didn't talk about, which like the doctor kind of dancing in the club, and the doctor saying like, you're not just unlucky, it's worse than that. I kind of didn't like that moment because I know what the doctor was saying, but I just think that moment it just felt so random. I just think maybe the doctor should have been someone that she was a little bit more familiar with, or they had like a much more meaningful conversation. Like, they struck up a conversation, like they found something else to talk about, and then maybe they got into a conversation about that, which, granted, I know that's more screen time, right? But I think it would have made that work a little bit better, because it just seems like, he started to be, charming and friendly, and then he was like, yeah, there's something bad going on, goodbye. Which, again, I know that's the doctor, but for the type of story and the type of doctor they're presenting here, I think that should have been a little bit more personable. This does not seem like a doctor who's having the post-regeneration madness, who just kind of figure out who he is, right, and just saying random things. This seems like a doctor who's very comfortable in his skin, knows who he is, has had lots of time to establish himself as the new doctor. So this conversation probably should have been a lot more smooth. Anyway, putting that aside, foster care stuff, I really like that. Then we get the moment where the baby gets stolen, and for me, the show, the episode here has a really high up and then has a low down. So when the baby gets taken out the window, there's a moment there that I don't really like, where Ruby's like, are you goblins? Wait, hey, are you hissing at me? Or roaring or whatever she said, growling, because I don't like that. It's just like I think for most people, and this is something you can forget with TV shows, right? You can see something on a TV screen, but like if you've ever just been in a room and turned around and had someone standing behind you, like think about how much that startles you, right? And think about what would happen if you looked out your window and like, not like a prop, not a puppet for Halloween, like you just saw a goblin walking on your roof. Like, you would be terrified, right? It doesn't matter how brave you think you are, like, because you're operating on an assumption of like what the world is like, and you suddenly see something that is inexplicable, right? That's why in Doctor Who, I think it's been so popular to do the thing like, oh, this is a prank, right? Oh, is someone messing around with me? Because like when Rose was up in the attic, or down in the basement with the Autons, she was like, "Hey, this is a prank. These must be students," because that's how most people would react. Like they're trying to fit it into their worldview because they're not thinking this is sci-fi. But you see something that can't possibly be a prank, and it's just goblins snatching a baby out of the carriage, you would be freaking out, right? And Ruby is like super young as well. Like she's an adult, but she's very young. So even then, she doesn't have as much life experience. She probably would be super freaking out, right? And then, so I didn't really like that interaction. But then you get the moment with the doctor running on the roof and like talking to her, like kind of chastising her for jumping on the ladder as he's running between roofs. Like, it's really, I don't even think it's possible to not like that moment. I was like kind of buckling over with laughter when that happened because it's just like the doctor just being like, "What are you doing? Who sees a ladder and just grabs it? Who sees a ladder in the sky and thinks, yeah, I'll give that a go, babes?" Like, that's so funny. That's exactly the kind of energy that I think is unique to this doctor, just even seeing just the little bit of him we've seen. I really liked that. I hope they bring more stuff like that with Ncuti Gatwa in the next season, because that's the kind of stuff that, like, you wouldn't have seen that with even a Tennant, like a 10th Doctor Tennant. You wouldn't have seen that with the 11th Doctor. You wouldn't have seen that with Capaldi. You wouldn't have seen that with Jodie. This is something very unique with the Doctor. He has a very high level of energy that's also very focused, right? He's not just, because Matt Smith had a lot of energy, but it was much more kind of all over the place. This Doctor has an energy that's very focused and very physical, so that I really like. But then, and then there's the whole thing with the gloves. It's a little bit goofy, right? The gloves, which control the gravity, so that way that people, all of your weight gets shifted to the ladder. That's fine, right? That kind of crazy stuff happening in Doctor Who. But then you have the moment where they actually, and I forgot to mention, the Doctor jumping off of the roof onto the ladder and like landing across from Ruby. That's just iconic. That's just so great. Action hero kind of returning to that. That's what I like a lot about John Pertwee's Doctor. But when they start to go up to the ship, this is where I think the episode's starting to take a dive. Okay, so full disclosure, this whole thing about the Goblin song, I knew about this before I watched it, so it softened the blow a little bit. But the lyrics to that song, I would not have allowed that personally. If I was an executive at the BBC, which, granted, I'm not a big fan of people in higher positions stepping in and saying, you can't do this. But, like, considering this is season 1 of Doctor Who, and this is, like, the thing we're marketing to new people, having a song with the lyrics, "Baby blood and baby bones, baby butter for the baby scones," or scones, right? I would not have allowed that. Like, this song goes on way too long. It's about eating babies. It's very brutal. And the thing is, I've heard some people say, like, well, the Doctor saved the baby, right? But these lyrics imply that, like, this has happened before. So, like, the goblins would work a lot better if they were, like, they're not cute, right? They're made not to be cute. They're kind of made to be, like, sort of ugly cute. But, like, you're like, oh, like, I hate all of these goblins, right? So it's like, I would rather not hate them that much. Like, and you know what I'm talking about, right? You can have villains that you love to hate. These are not villains that I love to hate. These are like, oh, I'm about to see this baby, like, turn into very disturbing imagery right before my eyes, right? So I just, and like, it's obvious that they're not going to do that because this is Doctor Who, right? But maybe you don't know that if you're just watching it for the first time. And more importantly, it kind of makes it more annoying that the lyrics are saying that, because it's like, I know they're not going to do that. Like, why even put that in? Like, why even do that, right? And then, you've got the Doctor kind of falling down with Ruby, and then the Doctor starts jumping in, which I like the musical thing, right? I'm not going to say I don't like Doctor Who being a musical. I don't mind musicals. I don't think characters have to justify why they're singing. I like when characters just break into song. I think it's kind of funny. And it's a literary device, just like in the same way that characters don't go, why is there an orchestra following me around, right? When there's like background music, it's just a device of a show, right? You don't need to explain why there's music in the background. You don't need to explain why there's words underneath them if the subtitles are turned on. And you don't need to explain why people are singing if it's a musical, right? It's because they do. So that's fine. But the major problem I had with this scene was, number one, like I said, the lyrics, and number two, the pacing. This is where the pacing started to get really, really weird. I'm talking like things... So I talked about how Ruby should be freaking out, right? So not only is she not very freaked out by this whole situation, which, again, like, you can show a strong character without having them, like, completely almost emotionless compared to how they should be. So a good thing to show that would be to have her freaking out and then get her cool back. Be like, okay, we got to do this, right? That's how you show a strong character, not like, oh man, they're gonna eat the baby. Like, huh? I just don't like that. Maybe it was the direction, maybe the way it was written. I don't know. But that should have been different. This conversation goes on for far too long when they're afraid the baby's going to be eaten, right? I think maybe you should have the doctor a little bit more level-headed, like, hold on, wait a minute, let's just think about this. And Ruby being like, well, we got to go right now, stop. I mean, she does say superficially, like, hey, they might eat the baby any minute. But, like, she says that so calmly, it just feels so detached, right? There's that. Then the doctor releases himself, and he kind of, like, waits too long to do that, and they take a minute to explain this whole thing about the sonic screwdriver, and it's just, I don't know. It just feels off. And I just, well, okay, let me go through it. Then they leave, right? They save the baby, obviously, and they leave, and that whole scene just kind of felt like, why was that there, right? Like, why did that sequence exist? Not like, why did it happen in the story? Like, it makes sense in the story, kind of. Although, I will say, the whole coincidence thing, the first time I watched it, I didn't really like it. The second time, and I really thought about, like, coincidence being a new form of physics and stuff, and the room being easy to get to. The second time, I was like, yeah, you know what? I'm kind of on board with that. I think I like that. I think the first time, since I was with my family, I just wasn't as focused on the ins and outs of that, because it's just more complex. But anyway, after that scene, I was like, I think that should have been cut down. That's the thing I'm talking about with the direction here. Cutting things down. There are so many things in this episode that I probably just would have edited down. And it's weird when I have that feeling when I watch something. I've had that feeling. I've actually worked on fan edits for films before. And obviously I do a lot of editing on this channel if it's that kind of video. So I have a bit of experience editing things. I've never been in a film editing room, but I have that feeling from this episode, like, oh, that should have been cut there. That went on way too long, right? Like all of those conversations up there, like, I think they should have found another place to put those. Anyway, after that scene, I was like, why did that happen? We go back down, we get more information about Ruby and her mom, and she tells her mom about what happened with finding out that this talk show was not able to trace her lineage, and that was a nice scene, where she's hugging her and she's like, I'm glad they didn't find anything because I don't know if I could share because you're all mine. And like, that was so sweet. That was so amazing. And then that just made me think even more, like, why did we cut away from this for goblins? Like, why did we do that? These actors are so strong, and it's not like Ruby, not Ruby, her name's not Ruby, Millie Gibson, it's not like she can't act. Like that scene where she's on the phone and she has to act like, you can tell her voice is putting on a certain performance, but her face is saying something completely different, and she's wiping away tears, but she's kind of smiling to sound that way. That's a hard thing to pull off, because everyone's had a conversation like that on the phone where you're not fine and you pretend you are fine. And that's hard to do. So, like, I know she can do it, right? Like, these are emotionally hard-hitting scenes. It just seems like they didn't write scenes like that before, when she's, like, with the goblins and stuff. So anyway, that scene where she comes back down, that was really nice. And then they're looking at the pictures and all this stuff, and the doctor's talking to the grandma, and he's super charming, right? It's just, Ncuti Gatwa, when he's on screen and he's being charming, it's like, he's very likable. This is probably the most likable acting doctor I've ever seen to start out with, although there are moments where he kind of chastises Ruby Sunday, and it's a little bit out of nowhere. Where where she's like, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" And he's like, "I'm trying," and I'm like, that's a little weird. But maybe, I'm sure, as he progresses, it's just like every doctor, he'll strike that balance a bit more. But overall, very, very good, right? Then you have the scene where Ruby disappears. And this is the moment where I really, really, really think the editing should have been a little better. Because the amount of time it takes the doctor to work this out is a little bit irritating. I mean, so yes, there are little pieces of it, but like, he spends so much time searching the whole house. Like, where's Ruby? Where's Ruby? Where's Ruby? And then he's like, oh, they took her. They took her instead. It's like, I think the reason they're doing that is because the director or the writer or whoever is trying to make sure the audience understands what's going on. But as soon as Ruby was gone, I already worked it out. I'm like, oh, they took her, right? The baby's fine. The doctor thought that the goblins were leaving, but they took Ruby instead. Like, I worked that out almost immediately, and I'm not saying like, oh, I'm so super smart. I'm guessing most people work that out anyway, right? And if you have a situation where you're afraid some people aren't going to work it out, then I think what you do there is you keep the scene going, but you explain it as you go along. So if you didn't get it right here, you'll get it, in the other scenes, which are reinforcing it, but also progressing the story, right? That's how you make sure that you're not just sitting there talking into the camera saying exposition kind of like Ncuti Gat was doing there, right? And then there's the thing with like him following the crack along the wall, and then like the house, there was that one like really shaky shot where it was showing the crack on the wall, and I don't think that was a very good shot, actually. Anyway, so like that whole moment was just so awkward, I thought. And then he goes back and he gets back in the TARDIS, of course, and we get this good lighting again. I like that lighting outside the church, right? But then he's like pulling the ship down, and like it just takes a long time, and you get the thing with the Goblin King being up there, and it's just like, obviously he's not going to eat the baby, right? He's not going to eat Ruby because Ruby is the new companion. And like I said, maybe some people don't know that because of the way the show works, but it's just most of the fans going into this, they know the deal. They know Ruby's the new companion, right? Like most of us do, like genuinely, we do, right? So like having that whole scene be extended is a little bit annoying potentially. I don't say that to be mean. I'm not trying to be mean to anyone, but it is important what the experience of the audience is. And I just think when he's pulling the ship down, it's like, okay, yeah, he's obviously going to get to the ship, right? And then the doctor like impales the Goblin King on the spire of the church, and I'm like, that's a weird way to end that, because I think the explanation there is like that the coincidence made the goblins disappear and he didn't really kill him necessarily, but for the episode that just spent so much time explaining what happened to Ruby, I thought, well, they could have spent like maybe a line on that and be like, oh, he didn't die, because killing him would be the easy way out, right? It was just such a coincidence that it made him disappear, but he's fine off in another reality. Like something like that would have made that moment work better. And like not with the doctor sitting there explaining it, but like, he has a moment later where him and Ruby are talking, and I'm like, why didn't he just say what happened? Like, why didn't he say that? Alternatively, maybe that's not what happened, and he just straight up just murdered the Goblin King, which is kind of out of character for the doctor. Even if that Goblin King was about to eat a baby, right? If the doctor has to murder a character like that, usually he's very remorseful, like, oh, I just wish I could have worked that out another way. I just watched a Fourth Doctor story that was like that, where a character died, and the doctor was like, I didn't want to kill him, but like, I was trying to help him, and he just wouldn't stop, and there was no other way for that to play out, and he like regretted it, like, and that seems a lot more like how the doctor would have reacted to that situation, knowing his character. And I get it, like, Russell's not trying to make the doctor dark and brooding anymore, but it's just like, even when a character gets like murdered like that, maybe supposedly, the doctor can't have a moment like that. There can be such a thing as being too positive all the time, right? You don't want the doctor to be so negative all the time. I get that, but he can at least have a moment there, you know. So I just thought that was poorly handled. So anyway, we get past that. Then you get the Doctor sort of running off at the end saying, oh, I forgot something, and slamming the door in Ruby's face. I really like this moment where, you know, he had that character kind of implied that they get killed by the goblin, or it was implied that they get killed by the goblins earlier. Which, by the way, I didn't really like that moment because it seemed like it was played for comedic effect, almost. And it's like, so did that character just die? And it's like, yes, it gets resolved later, but we don't know that until the end of the episode, so I thought that should have been maybe framed as a bit darker instead of being like slapstick Christmas comedy, you know? Like, yeah, you had the thing with like the Christmas tree coming to kill Rose and her mom, like in the Christmas Invasion, right? But that whole thing was super campy, but this is just like, nope, this character just got murdered. So, but I do like the resolution. I like that the Doctor went back and saved this character. I think Davina was the name of the character. But anyway, or you know what? I think I might have heard something that Davina is actually a real, like, talk show host. I don't know. But anyway, the Doctor goes back and saves this person. I like that moment. And you have this weird thing with Mrs. Flood, which I'm going to get into. That's the thing I teased at the beginning. But my favorite moment in the episode was Ruby by herself working out that the Doctor was a time traveler. At first I thought, well, this is taking her a little bit long to work out, right? Because he kind of straight up said he was a time traveler, but then I thought, no, he really didn't, because he said time travelers are amazing, right? Like, wow, you know? And then I thought, oh, no, he didn't really say that explicitly. And you get, like, this moment where Ruby, like, it zooms in on her and she puts her hand in front of her face, and she's like, oh, my God. Like, that was very good acting on her part. I love that. So, you get her running outside, and then, you know, the traditional thing, right, that her going to the TARDIS. But then you got Mrs. Flood kind of urging her on, which I think actually added a lot to the scene. And so, you know, you've got that whole thing going on there. And then you get the shot. I was watching this with people who had not seen the interior of the TARDIS yet, and I kept thinking, are they going to give a good angle on the interior of the TARDIS? But then they finally had kind of the rotating shot there, which wasn't as full as I would have liked it. I think for an introduction to Doctor Who, there should be like several shots of the interior of the TARDIS, like grand wide shot, close-up shot of the console, grand wide shot of the companion running around, kind of like we got with Amy Pond. But, you know, that's a nitpick. And it's nice. I'm kind of disappointed they didn't go with, like, the yellowish lights in the TARDIS, because the blue lights in the TARDIS was kind of what I associated with Tennant, like the 14th Doctor. It would have been nice if they had more of the yellow that they had at the end of or at the end of the last episode, which I thought looked really good in that TARDIS room. But anyway, that's what they went with there. It was nice, you know. At the end, having Ruby run in and him saying, like, I'm the Doctor, it's like, well, she already knows that. So, like, why was that the last line? And I know, like, logically it makes sense, right? It's probably for the trailer or something as well. But just having him say even one more thing, like, I'm the Doctor, let's go. Like, something like that. Like, I keep having these moments in these episodes where I'm like, why didn't they just do that line a little bit different? It's kind of starting to drive me crazy. Like, thinking, oh, this line could have been just tweaked slightly and it would have been so much better. It's almost like an itch if you've ever had that feeling when watching something, like, oh, why didn't they just do that a little bit different? Okay, let's talk about Mrs. Flood. Okay, so Flood, last name, obviously, kind of like pond, river, flood, river song. That seems like the most obvious answer, and that makes me think that's not what it is. You know? And I know, right, kind of the whole misleading expectation thing can be a bit annoying, but I don't... Look, if it was River Song, I would not be surprised by that. It would be fine. I would be okay with that explanation. I think it's Susan. And I'll tell you why I think it's Susan. I have a few different reasons. First, it's kind of the way she said, never been in a TARDIS. Like, I've seen lots of episodes with Susan, and there's something about the way she said TARDIS and the way she smiled when she kind of looked almost into the camera that really reminded me of Susan, okay? Second reason, Russell T Davies, I think, is trying to do sort of a renaissance of Doctor Who right now. I know that the 60th anniversary specials were not as anniversary specially as they should have been, but seeing how he's tried to resolve a lot of things recently, I would have thought that this would be a good time to bring back Susan. So there's sort of the whole environment surrounding, the story of the Doctor supposedly coming back and stuff, and one day I'll come back, sort of thing. Carol Ann Ford is a lot older now, right? So the amount of time you have, I hate to say this, I don't want to be sad, right, or morbid, but the amount of time we have with Carol Ann Ford is kind of short now. There's that, and there's the fact also that granddaughter. We've talked a lot about granddaughters in this episode, right? We just talked about, Ruby being the granddaughter and her grandmother, okay? Then we have the whole thing with the Doctor saying, I have no one. It's just a quick little line, I have nobody, right? I was adopted, I don't know where I come from. So the Doctor talking about losing his family. And then the granddaughter, and then to the left, kind of in the frame, like, she's framed like between the windows, right, of the house, and it's like there's 6 panels on the left side. I don't know if there's 6 panels on the right side on that window. I wasn't sure, but just putting all those things together, and putting that with the fact that River Song seems a little too obvious to me, I think it's Susan. I do. My other guess would be Romana, but I'm not sure. I know the story of Susan, right? I'm pretty familiar with Susan. I haven't watched all of her episodes, but I'm pretty familiar with that character. Romana, I don't know much about. I've seen Destiny of the Daleks, and I think that's really the only Romana story I've seen. I haven't seen a lot of the Fourth Doctor. I saw season 12 and I saw season 13. I just finished the Seeds of Doom. So I haven't even gotten to the part with Romana yet. I know, there's some quirkiness with, Romana. And by the way, I guess I've seen Shada. I saw the recon of Shada, which was an episode that was canceled because of, strikes at the BBC back in the day, and then they reconstructed it. They used clips of Shada for, the 5 Doctors, and it really wasn't the 5 Doctors, right? They just, it was it's the 4 Doctors and clips from Shada. But anyway, I think putting those things together, it could be Romana, but I think it's Susan. I want to hear what people think about that. I'm just really curious to hear that. I did like this episode overall, but it had some problems. Every episode has had major problems, really, except for Wild Blue Yonder. Wild Blue Yonder was kind of of these 4 episodes that we've gotten this year, Wild Blue Yonder was the only one where I thought, that's a great episode of Doctor Who. The Star Beast, good, not great, I thought. And The Giggle, again, I liked that one, but it had some issues. Did I post my review of The Giggle? Did I even do that? I don't remember if I posted my review of The Giggle or not. I hope I did. Anyway, if I didn't post my review of The Giggle, I'm sorry. But, this episode, it just needed some editing. That's the one thing that I think is a little bit frustrating, too, is, like I said, it's just when a few things could have been tweaked. But, I think, I don't know. I think this whole thing with the Goblin, it would have been hard to edit that in a way that I would have found satisfactory, so I have to be honest about that. But everything else, there's some good potential ideas. I just really hope that they hit their stride and have more consistently good episodes. I'm going to be interested to see a few things. Number one, what were the viewing figures? And what was the audience appreciation index? And also, who was the director? Because I'm paying a lot more attention to episode directors. I used to just kind of look at the showrunner and think, oh, that's the showrunner. But, who directed because whoever directed Wild Blue Yonder, and I don't remember the guy's name, but whoever that was, they should bring him back to do more episodes because he did a great job, right? I know Rachel Talalay did the Star Beast, and I don't remember who did the other one. and I don't know who did this one either. But I do have to say one more thing. The viewing figures, have not been bad this season. Like, they're definitely up from what they were in the Whittaker era. Some of the episodes of the Tennant era were similar to this number, and then the audience appreciation indexes have been pretty high. I think, have they all been above 80? Either they were all above 84, 80, I'm not sure, but a few of them got like to the what's considered excellent audience appreciation index. And I'm guessing since this is a Christmas episode, the ratings are going to be pretty high for it. And of course, it's different now because they don't take into consideration things like Disney Plus and where there's so much competition, right? And the show's been in a little bit of a downturn for a long time during the Whittaker era, but the ratings seem to be doing okay. I really hope they hold for the next season, but we'll see, because if they don't hit their stride with the writing and really start banging out some really top tier episodes, kind of like Wild Blue Yonder, I don't know if they can keep these figures. I think a lot of people might become a little bit more indifferent, and I don't want that to happen. I want the show to be really popular. I want the show to be really good. We'll see what happens. Guys, please let me know what you thought of this episode. I definitely am glad I watched it. It was a nice thing, a nice present to get on Christmas. Doctor Who, The Church on Ruby Road, what did you think? Let me know below, and I'll talk to you guys later. Merry Christmas. Bye-bye.